Welcome to the heart of medieval life, a world far removed from the comfort and order of modern civilization, yet brimming with a kind of raw, unrefined vitality that has fascinated historians for centuries. Imagine yourself approaching a village along a winding dirt road. The sun is low, casting long, golden streaks across the fields, and the air carries the mixed scents of earth, livestock, and smoke from distant hearths. The village itself is small, a scattering of timber, framed houses with thatched roofs, each dwelling crowded with the sounds of daily labor. Children run barefoot along the narrow lanes, their laughter mingling with the braying of donkeys, the bleating of sheep, and the occasional shout of a farmer urging a cow back into the pen. In the distance, you see a modest building whose darkened, smoke-stained walls seem to absorb the fading light. Above its door hangs a simple sign depicting a tankard of ale swaying slightly in the evening breeze. You have arrived at the medieval tavern, the focal point of communal life. Stepping closer, you notice the uneven cobblestones beneath your feet, worn smooth by generations of travelers, merchants, and villagers. The doorway is low, forcing you to duck as you enter. Immediately, you are enveloped by a mixture of aromas, the sharp tang of spilled ale, the smoky scent of a hearth burning constantly for warmth and cooking, the savory richness of roasting meat, and the faint but unmistakable musk of unwashed bodies pressed close together in a crowded room. The tavern is dimly lit, the flickering glow of candles and a central fire casting long, dancing shadows across the rough timber walls. Every beam and plank seems alive, etched with the marks of countless hands and the history of hundreds of evenings spent in this very space. The room is bustling with activity. Rough wooden tables and benches are arranged haphazardly, accommodating the eclectic mix of patrons who have gathered. Peasants with calloused hands and dirt. Streaked faces lean forward to speak in low tones, their eyes glinting with curiosity or mischief. Merchants, still bearing the dust of the road on their cloaks and boots, negotiate over goods or recount tales of distant markets. Travelers, weary from days or weeks on the road, slump onto benches with visible relief, eager to enjoy a simple meal and a drink. Even minor nobles may be found here occasionally, their presence both a mark of status and a rare opportunity to connect with the broader community. The tavern, in essence, is a microcosm of medieval society, bringing together individuals from diverse social classes in a single, shared space. The floor is uneven, a mixture of packed earth and rough, hewn stone, often slick with spilled liquids, mud, or straw strewn by those seeking to keep their footing. The benches, sturdy but uncomfortable, groan under the weight of patrons, many of whom have traveled long distances. Some of the more fortunate or influential may secure a chair or a spot by the fire, while others are left to squeeze onto shared benches or even stand near the hearth. The walls themselves tell a story, blackened from centuries of smoke and soot, etched with scratches, carvings, and graffiti left by previous visitors. Names, dates, and crude drawings mark the passage of time, a testament to the tavern's enduring place in village life. As you settle into the room, your eyes begin to adjust to the dim light, and you notice the intricate dance of human interaction around you. Conversations overlap, creating a constant hum of voices, laughter, and argument. Some speak in hushed tones, exchanging secrets or gossip, while others shout boisterously, their voices carrying across the room to be heard over the clatter of mugs and the occasional thud of someone bumping into a bench. Children, allowed to roam in the presence of adults, dart between tables, delivering messages, fetching food, or simply playing, their presence a reminder of the tavern's role as a communal space for all ages. The dynamic is chaotic yet strangely harmonious. a testament to the unwritten rules and social codes that govern behavior within these walls. The tavern keepers, often stout and experienced individuals, move through the room with practiced ease. They carry trays laden with mugs of ale, jugs of mead, and plates of food, calling out orders in a voice that commands attention without raising itself above the general din. Their presence is both authoritative and protective. They are responsible for maintaining order, settling disputes, and ensuring that the business of the tavern continues smoothly. A misplaced mug, a spilled drink, or a verbal altercation can escalate quickly, but the tavern keeper's experienced eye and firm hand usually prevent chaos from overwhelming the establishment. Their role is essential, for without them, the delicate balance of social interaction and commercial enterprise could quickly collapse. The sounds of the tavern are a symphony in themselves. The clinking of mugs and plates punctuates the steady murmur of conversation, while the occasional shout or burst of laughter rises above the general noise. Children's giggles and the scuffling of bare feet across the floor add a lighter note, while the constant crackle and pop of the central hearth provides a rhythmic, almost hypnotic background. On special occasions, a traveling musician may be present, strumming a lute or playing a flute, their music weaving through the room and prompting patrons to join in with song or dance. These moments of levity are treasured, providing relief from the often harsh realities of medieval life, and they contribute to the tavern's reputation as a place of joy, storytelling, and communal entertainment. Beyond the sensory experiences of sight, sound, and smell, the tavern serves a deeper social function. In an era when literacy was limited and news traveled slowly, the tavern was a critical hub for the exchange of information. Travelers brought tales of distant lands, reports of bandit activity, or updates on political events, which were shared over mugs of ale and absorbed eagerly by those present. Local gossip circulated with equal vigor, influencing reputations, forging alliances, and occasionally sparking conflicts. In this way, the tavern was not merely a place of leisure, but a vital instrument of social cohesion and communal knowledge, shaping the village's perception of the wider world. As you move through the room, taking in the scenes before you, it becomes clear that every individual has a role, whether consciously or unconsciously. The peasant leaning on the bench tells a story to entertain, distract, or inform. The merchant haggles over a price, asserting his authority and skill in negotiation. The traveling knight or soldier may observe quietly, gathering intelligence or simply enjoying the respite from the road. Even the children, seemingly chaotic, contribute to the energy of the room, reminding all present of the continuity of life and the presence of the future generation. In essence, the tavern is a living organism, its energy and character shaped by the people who inhabit it and the interactions that unfold within its walls. Food and drink, though central to the tavern's purpose, also carry symbolic significance. Ale and mead are not merely beverages. They are a currency of social exchange, a means of cementing relationships, celebrating achievements, or negotiating agreements. Sharing a mug of ale is an act of trust and camaraderie, and to be refused, a drink can carry social consequences. The tavern's meals, while simple, bread, cheese, roasted meats, and stews, serve to nourish both body and spirit, providing sustenance for travelers, laborers, and villagers alike. The act of eating together fosters a sense of community, reinforcing the bonds that hold the social fabric together. Conflict is never far from the surface. The tavern, with its mix of strong drink, strong personalities, and close quarters, is a place where tempers can flare, Arguments may arise over trivial matters, a spilled drink, an insult, a game of dice, but the tavern has its own mechanisms for resolution. Patrons are guided by social norms and respect for the tavern keeper's authority, while the physical layout of tables and benches allows for both confrontation and retreat. Brawls, though not uncommon, are typically contained, and in many cases they serve to reinforce social hierarchies, establish reputations, and provide a controlled outlet for tension that might otherwise disrupt the broader community. The architecture of the tavern itself reflects the practical needs and cultural values of the medieval period. Timber beams support the structure, their surfaces bearing the marks of centuries of use. The hearth, often central to the building, provides warmth, light, and a place to cook food, symbolizing the hearth as the heart of the home extended into public life. Windows are small, allowing only limited light, and doors are low and sturdy, providing both security and a threshold between the chaos of the outside world and the controlled environment within. Every detail, from the worn floorboards to the smoke, blackened walls, contributes to an atmosphere that is both welcoming and formidable, intimate yet public. As the evening progresses, the tavern begins to take on an almost magical quality. Shadows lengthen and deepen, the firelight dances more vividly, and the collective energy of the patrons seems to pulse in time with the room itself. Stories grow taller, laughter louder, and music more spirited. In these moments, the tavern transcends its role as a mere building or business. It becomes a stage on which the theater of medieval life is enacted. The lives of the patrons, with all their joys, sorrows, ambitions, and fears, converge in a single space, creating a snapshot of a world that is at once foreign and intimately human. To truly understand the medieval tavern, one must recognize its dual nature. It is both sanctuary and arena, a place of comfort and confrontation, nourishment and indulgence. It reflects the broader society from which it springs, encapsulating the hierarchies, tensions, and interactions that define the medieval world. Within its walls, one finds the essence of community life, the sharing of stories, the negotiation of social bonds, the celebration of achievements, and the confrontation of conflict. It is a place where history is not merely observed, but lived in all its chaotic, vibrant, and deeply human complexity. By stepping inside a medieval tavern, we gain more than just a glimpse of daily life. We enter a space where the past becomes tangible. The smells, sounds, and sights evoke the realities of a world both harsh and fascinating. The interactions of its patrons reveal the social structures, customs, and values of the time. And the energy of the room, ever changing yet enduring, reminds us that history is not simply a series of dates and events, but a living tapestry woven from countless individual experiences. Here, in the warmth, noise, and humanity of the tavern, we come closer than ever to understanding what it truly meant to live, laugh, argue, and gather in the medieval world. The medieval tavern was more than just a building filled with people. It was a universe of flavors, aromas, and textures, a place where sustenance and social connection intertwined in ways that shaped daily life. The very first thing one would notice upon entering is the smell, a complex bouquet that would assault and embrace the senses at the same time. The tang of spilled ale, fermented and bitter, mingled with the rich aroma of roasted meat, the smoky scent of the ever-burning hearth, and the earthy undertones of bread fresh from the oven. These smells were not merely incidental. They defined the character of the tavern, signaling warmth, safety, and abundance to those who had traveled long roads or labored in fields under the harsh sun. Every tavern had its own distinctive olfactory signature, a combination of its patrons' habits, the food prepared, and the way the air circulated through wooden beams blackened by decades of smoke. Ale was the lifeblood of the medieval tavern, flowing more freely than water in many places, for it was safer to drink. Water sources were often contaminated, and the brewing process, however crude, provided a drink that could be consumed without fear of disease. Taverns produced ale in varying strengths and flavors, from light, sweet brews that could be enjoyed throughout the day to strong, bitter concoctions that packed a punch with each swallow. The ale itself was rarely filtered, so it carried a cloudy, yeasty quality, sometimes thick and heavy, sometimes thin and sharp, reflecting the skill of the brewer and the ingredients available that season. Mead, a honey-based fermented drink, could be found in taverns as well, often reserved for special occasions or wealthier patrons, while wine remained largely the province of the nobility or travelers with pockets deep enough to pay the often steep price. To drink was not simply to quench thirst, it was an act of participation in the social fabric of the tavern, a ritual that signaled inclusion in the shared experience of the space. Food, though simple by modern standards, was essential to the tavern's function. The hearth, a central feature of almost every establishment, served multiple purposes, providing warmth, light, and a place to cook meals. Roasted meat, usually pork, chicken, or occasionally beef, sizzled over open flames or on spits turned by hand. The smell of roasting, seasoned lightly with salt and herbs, would permeate the room, enticing weary travelers and hungry villagers alike. Stews and pottages made from available vegetables, grains, and scraps of meat simmered in cauldrons, their fragrant vapors mingling with the smoke and ale. Bread, often dark and coarse, was baked in simple ovens and served fresh, torn into pieces and shared around tables. Cheese, cured or soft, sometimes flavored with herbs, provided additional sustenance. The food was hearty, designed to satisfy the needs of laborers and travelers whose daily exertions required calories and strength rather than culinary finesse. Every bite was imbued with a sense of practicality, yet it was also a conduit for social interaction. Sharing bread or dividing a plate of meat was an act of camaraderie, a gesture of hospitality that transcended class distinctions, if only temporarily. The tavern keeper, or innkeeper, was the linchpin of this environment, orchestrating the flow of food, drink, and people with a mixture of authority and intuition. They knew the patrons by sight, often by reputation, and could anticipate trouble before it erupted. It was common for tavern keepers to be stout, broad, and capable of asserting control physically if necessary, but the true skill lay in their understanding of human behavior. They balanced indulgence and restraint, allowing patrons to enjoy themselves without letting chaos take over. A mug of ale might be refused not out of malice, but as a preventive measure, an effort to maintain order while still providing for the needs of those present. Their role was both managerial and social. They were mediators, hosts, and sometimes even confidants, entrusted with the knowledge of their patrons' stories and secrets. The act of drinking was deeply ritualized. Mugs and tankards, often carved from wood or cast from pewter, were raised in gestures of camaraderie, friendship, or agreement. Drinking together was a form of communication, signaling trust, solidarity, or negotiation. A shared drink could seal a deal, celebrate a victory, or mark a significant social moment. Tavern goers developed an acute awareness of the quality and quantity of their beverages. Ale was sometimes sold by measure, with larger mugs for the more affluent or for those seeking to impress. Mead might be poured sparingly, its sweetness and rarity making it a prized indulgence. Wine, when available, was savored, sometimes diluted with water, as was customary, to extend its presence throughout the meal or gathering. The careful observation of these drinking customs offered insights into the hierarchy, etiquette, and social codes operating within the tavern. The social dynamics surrounding food and drink were as intricate as the flavors themselves. Patrons often came in groups, but not all groups were static. The medieval tavern was a fluid environment, with strangers mingling, negotiating, and observing one another. A farmer might sit beside a traveling merchant, and their conversation could range from mundane topics of weather and crop yields to intricate discussions of regional trade or distant wars. The sharing of food or the offering of a drink could serve as an icebreaker, establishing trust and encouraging dialogue between otherwise unconnected individuals. In this way, the tavern became a forum for the exchange of ideas, a place where information, news, and gossip moved as freely as the ale itself. Meals in the tavern were typically communal, reinforcing the collective nature of medieval life. Plates were rarely individual. Instead, dishes were placed in the center of tables, to be divided among those seated. Eating was often noisy, unrefined, and vigorous, with patrons tearing bread with their hands and savoring meat directly from the bone. This communal consumption reflected both practicality and the egalitarian moments that could emerge within the tavern's walls. It also served as a visual and sensory reinforcement of the social bonds being cultivated. To observe a meal in a medieval tavern was to witness the intersection of necessity, pleasure, and social negotiation, all conducted within the framework of a shared human experience. Alehouses also functioned as cultural hubs. Certain taverns might specialize in stronger or more distinctive brews, attracting patrons from neighboring villages or distant towns. Recipes and brewing techniques were often closely guarded, passed down through generations of brewers or tavern keepers. Patrons developed preferences and reputations based on their choice of drink, with some seeking the heaviest ales to prove fortitude, while others favored lighter, more palatable varieties. The selection of drink was both personal and performative, reflecting aspects of identity, status, and taste. Observing the interaction between drinkers and the beverages themselves provides insight into the nuances of medieval social life, where even the choice of a tankard could carry significance. Food and drink also served as instruments of storytelling and entertainment. Tavern goers often consumed their meals alongside the performances of musicians, jesters, or storytellers. A bard might weave tales of distant lands or heroic deeds, occasionally pausing for dramatic effect as patrons raised their mugs in appreciation. Stories could be enhanced by the sensory experience of the meal, the warmth of ale encouraging laughter, the satisfaction of a hearty stew lending credence to tales of battle or adventure. In this sense, the consumption of food and drink was not merely practical. It was performative, participatory, and deeply intertwined with the cultural life of the tavern. The preparation and serving of food was itself a spectacle. Cooking took place in full view of the patrons, over open flames or in large cauldrons, providing both entertainment and reassurance regarding the freshness and safety of the meal. Taverns often employed multiple cooks or assistants to manage the demands of a busy evening, and the rhythmic sounds of chopping, stirring, and sizzling added to the ambient soundtrack of the establishment. Patrons might offer advice, critique, or praise, creating a dynamic interaction between those who prepared the food and those who consumed it. The sensory immersion extended beyond taste. It encompassed sight, sound, and smell, forging a multisensory experience unique to the tavern setting. Even the simplest acts, pouring ale, breaking bread, or passing a plate of meat, were imbued with meaning. Hierarchies were subtly reinforced with seating arrangements, order of serving, and allocation of food, signaling social position or respect. A guest of honor might receive the choicest portion of meat or the first pour of ale, while others waited their turn. These gestures, though small, communicated important social information, teaching newcomers the rhythms, rules, and etiquette of tavern life. In this way, the tavern functioned as an informal school of socialization, where lessons in behavior, hierarchy, and communal norms were delivered through observation and participation rather than formal instruction. The environment of the tavern, rich with sensory stimuli and human interaction, could evoke a wide range of emotions. For the weary traveler, it provided relief and comfort, a momentary escape from the hardships of the road. For the laborer, it offered camaraderie, laughter, and the chance to share stories of daily toil. For the merchant or tradesman, it presented opportunities to negotiate, gather information, or forge alliances. And for the tavern keeper, it was a carefully balanced orchestration of human behavior, commerce, and entertainment. The tavern was simultaneously a stage and a sanctuary, a place where life's necessities and pleasures intertwined in a complex dance, guided by both tradition and the improvisations of those present. The role of alcohol in mediating social interactions cannot be overstated. Ale, mead, and wine acted as lubricants, easing the passage of conversation and lowering barriers between individuals. A shared mug could transform a tense negotiation into a friendly exchange or encourage storytelling among strangers. Conversely, overindulgence could spark conflicts, yet even these moments contributed to the social fabric, reinforcing reputations and hierarchies in ways that were understood and accepted by patrons. Drinking in a medieval tavern was thus not merely consumption, it was communication, performance, and participation in a shared cultural ritual. As the evening wore on, the interplay of food, drink, and social interaction created a rhythm unique to each tavern. Mugs were refilled, plates replenished, and conversations meandered from mundane matters to tales of heroism, local politics, or scandal. Patrons observed one another carefully, noting alliances, rivalries, and opportunities, while newcomers learned the unspoken rules of engagement through both observation and gentle correction. The tavern was a living organism, sustained by the energy of its participants, shaped by their choices, and animated by the simple, universal pleasures of food, drink, and company. In conclusion, the drinks and food of a medieval tavern were far more than sustenance. They were instruments of social cohesion, cultural expression, and human connection. Ale and mead flowed as freely as stories, roasted meats and hearty breads nourished body and spirit, and the rituals of consumption created bonds that transcended class and circumstance. The tavern was a space where human needs, desires, and relationships converged, offering comfort, entertainment, and opportunity in equal measure. By understanding the centrality of food and drink in this environment, we gain insight not only into the daily lives of medieval people, but also into the broader patterns of society, culture, and community that defined the Middle Ages. Step closer and listen carefully. The medieval tavern was not a quiet place. Even as you walked across its uneven floors, the symphony of the room would surround you, enveloping your senses and immersing you in a world that pulsed with life. The sounds of voices alone created a constant hum, an unending stream of conversation, argument, laughter, and storytelling that ebbed and flowed like the tide. Each voice carried its own tone, its own rhythm, whether low and conspiratorial, raised in excitement, or brash and commanding. The overlapping of voices could seem chaotic to an outsider, yet for those accustomed to the tavern, there was a recognizable pattern, a kind of auditory map that signaled who was speaking, who was listening, and who might be ready to intervene if a disagreement escalated. The clinking of mugs and the clatter of plates punctuated the constant murmur of voices. Wooden tankards struck against each other in gestures of camaraderie. Metal cups rang with toasts and celebration, and spoons scraped against coarse ceramic bowls in the preparation or consumption of stews and pottages. Occasionally, the sound of a plate or mug slipping from a tabletop would resonate sharply, drawing a brief, unified reaction from those nearby, whether laughter, an admonishment, or a swift effort to prevent a brawl. These sounds were not random, but integral to the rhythm of the tavern. They were part of a collective language, audible cues that indicated mood, movement, and even subtle shifts in the social dynamics of the room. Amid these everyday noises, the tavern often hosted performances that brought the space alive in different ways. Traveling musicians were frequent visitors, sometimes brought along by patrons who had heard of their skill, or sometimes seeking their own fortune from the generosity of the crowd. A lute might be strummed, its gentle chords rising above the clamor, or a flute might trill, its high notes cutting through the deeper tones of conversation. Drums, tambourines, and other percussive instruments added a heartbeat to the environment, prompting patrons to tap their feet or join in rhythmically with hand claps or stomps. The music was rarely formal or polished by modern standards, but it was expressive, engaging, and deeply rooted in the communal culture of the tavern. Songs were central to this musical life, often bawdy, humorous, or storytelling in nature. A ballad might recount the heroic exploits of a knight or the tragic tale of a lost love, while a drinking song encouraged participation from every patron who knew the words or was willing to invent them. Singing was a participatory act, a communal engagement that broke down barriers between strangers. A traveler, weary and cautious, could be drawn into the chorus by the warmth and invitation of the tavern's energy. Laughter would ripple through the room as voices clashed, harmonized imperfectly, and celebrated the joy of sound itself. Music and song were not mere entertainment. They were a medium through which the communal spirit of the tavern was expressed, amplified, and shared. But not all sounds were pleasant. Arguments were common, and the tavern's close quarters meant that tempers could flare quickly. A disagreement over a game of dice or a spilled drink might escalate into a heated debate, punctuated by raised voices, slamming fists, or a sudden shift in body language. The sound of chairs scraping across stone or wooden floors often signaled movement toward confrontation. Patrons learned to read these auditory cues, anticipating potential conflicts and choosing whether to intervene, avoid, or observe. Even the smallest noises, such as the harsh laugh of a particularly aggressive man or the muttered curse of someone insulted, carried meaning, signaling social hierarchies, alliances, and boundaries within the space. Children added their own layer to the soundscape. Their laughter, running footsteps, and occasional cries created a counterpoint to the adult world. They darted between tables delivering messages, fetching food, or simply playing, their high-pitched voices cutting through the lower hum of adult conversation. Parents and older patrons often kept a watchful eye, guiding the children subtly through the social norms of the tavern, teaching them when to speak, when to listen, and how to navigate the complex interactions of a space filled with so many different people. Even their presence was instructive, reminding all who were present of the continuity of life and the importance of intergenerational connection. The central hearth contributed significantly to the auditory environment. The crackling of burning wood, the occasional pop of a knot catching fire, and the gentle roar of flames created a constant, comforting backdrop. It was the rhythm against which all other sounds were measured. Patrons might move closer to the fire to warm themselves, shifting the ambient acoustics as bodies and furniture changed positions. The fire was both literal and symbolic, a source of light, warmth, and sustenance, as well as a gathering point around which social interactions naturally coalesced. The hearth sounds, combined with the human voices and musical performances, created a rich, immersive auditory tapestry unique to the medieval tavern. Occasionally, the tavern would host storytellers whose voices wove a different kind of soundscape. These individuals, sometimes professional, sometimes impromptu, would capture the attention of the room with tales of adventure, tragedy, humor, or legend. Their words, delivered with rhythm, pauses, and emphasis, became instruments in themselves, guiding the reactions of the audience. Patrons responded with laughter, gasps, or murmurs of agreement, each sound amplifying the impact of the narrative. Storytelling in the tavern was performative, interactive, and dynamic, blending seamlessly with music, conversation, and the ambient noises of everyday activity to create a complex acoustic ecosystem. The interaction between music and daily life was fascinating. Musicians often adapted to the room's energy, adjusting tempo, volume, and style to match the mood of the crowd. If a heated debate raged in one corner, a musician might play a lively tune to distract or diffuse tension. During moments of celebration, such as the arrival of a noble patron, the conclusion of a business deal, or a festive evening, the music would swell, drawing everyone into participation. The responsiveness of musicians to the room's energy demonstrates how integral sound was to shaping experience in the tavern. Music did not merely accompany life, it directed it, provided context, and influenced social interactions in subtle but profound ways. One cannot discuss the sounds of the tavern without acknowledging the human body as an instrument of expression. Footsteps, claps, whistles, and shouts all contributed to the room's acoustic complexity. Patrons used their voices not only for speech, but for signaling, warning, or calling attention to events. The thud of a fist against a table, the shuffle of boots across a floor strewn with straw, and the occasional squeal or yelp from a minor accident all became part of the shared auditory environment. Even silence, when it occurred, carried weight. An unusual quiet might signal tension, anticipation, or respect, prompting careful observation from all present. Drinking itself added to the soundscape. The slosh of ale in a tankard, the glug of liquid poured from a jug, and the clink of mugs being tapped together in toast were almost musical in their regularity. Each act of drinking was accompanied by sounds that punctuated conversation, punctuated music, and punctuated conflict. Patrons developed an almost instinctive awareness of these auditory cues, understanding the subtle messages conveyed by a pause before drinking, a raised mug, or a sudden gulp. In this way, sound became a medium for social interaction, conveying information as much as words themselves. The tavern's acoustics, shaped by low ceilings, timber beams, and stone walls, amplified and distorted sounds in interesting ways. Voices echoed slightly, laughter resonated, and music carried further than might be expected. This created a heightened sense of presence, making every sound more immediate and impactful. Patrons adjusted their volume and tone in response, contributing to a delicate balance between chaos and comprehension. The auditory environment demanded attention, teaching visitors to listen carefully, interpret meaning, and respond appropriately. A skill as vital as knowing the rules of etiquette or the customs of the community. Brawls, when they occurred, were dramatic spectacles in both sight and sound. The sharp crack of a fist, the scraping of a chair pushed aside, and the roar of shouting filled the room, drawing attention and often causing nearby patrons to either flee or intervene. These conflicts, though dangerous, were part of the tavern's social ecology. They reinforced hierarchies, established reputations, and tested the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The sounds of violence were counterbalanced by music, laughter, and conversation, creating a tension that kept the environment dynamic, unpredictable, and deeply engaging. Music and storytelling also provided opportunities for social learning. Patrons listened attentively, absorbing not only the content, but the delivery, tone, and nuances of performance. Songs and tales reinforced moral lessons, cultural values, historical memory, and communal identity. They were both entertaining and educational, shaping the world view of listeners in subtle ways. The interplay between the auditory environment and social function demonstrates how deeply sound was embedded in the experience of the medieval tavern. As the evening progressed, the cumulative effect of these sounds, voices, music, movement, fire, and drinking, created an immersive sensory environment that could only be fully appreciated through direct experience. Newcomers quickly learned to navigate it, attuning their ears to patterns, cues, and rhythms that indicated mood, intention, and opportunity. Long-time patrons moved confidently, participating in the auditory choreography with skill, whether by joining in song, contributing to conversation, or simply observing quietly. In this way, sound became a medium of mastery, a way to engage with the tavern community and assert one's place within it. The medieval tavern, in its rich acoustic complexity, was a space alive with human presence, emotion, and interaction. Every sound carried meaning, every note contributed to the atmosphere, and every word or noise helped shape the social reality of the room. To enter a tavern was to step into a living symphony, where music, conversation, laughter, argument, and ritual blended seamlessly to create a space that was vibrant, chaotic, and profoundly human. Understanding the sounds of the tavern provides insight not only into daily life, but also into the ways in which people communicated, celebrated, and navigated the social world in the Middle Ages. Even in moments of quiet, the tavern's auditory identity remained strong. The crackle of embers, the drip of melting ice or spilled ale, and the occasional whisper of a clandestine conversation reminded all present that life continued to unfold, even when less visibly dramatic. These subtler sounds reinforced the awareness that the tavern was not static, but an evolving environment, responsive to the presence, mood, and actions of its patrons. In essence, the medieval tavern was a living theater of sound. Its music, voices, movements, and ambient noises were not merely background. They were central to the experience, shaping emotion, behavior, and social cohesion. The auditory environment was inseparable from the visual, tactile, and olfactory experiences of the tavern, creating a holistic immersion into a world far removed from our own yet deeply familiar in its humanity. Every sound mattered, every noise told a story, and every musical note contributed to the rich tapestry of communal life. By appreciating the complexity of sound within the tavern, we gain a deeper understanding of medieval culture, social interaction, and daily life. The noises that might seem chaotic or random to modern ears were, in fact, part of a sophisticated system of communication, ritual, and entertainment. From the clink of mugs to the strum of a lute, from the laughter of children to the roar of a brawl, Every sound carried significance, creating a living, breathing environment that was both chaotic and coherent, unpredictable yet familiar. Stepping out of the tavern, one would carry with them the memory of this symphony, the mingling of voices, the rhythm of music, the crackle of the hearth, the sharpness of argument, and the joy of shared song. It is in these sounds that the essence of the medieval tavern comes alive, revealing the humanity, creativity, and resilience of those who inhabited it. The tavern was never silent, never still. It was a space of engagement, connection, and expression, a testament to the enduring power of sound to shape human experience. The medieval tavern was not merely a place to drink, eat, or exchange stories. It was a center of commerce, negotiation, and opportunity, a hub where the economic and social life of a community intersected. While we often imagine taverns primarily as sites of revelry and merriment, they were in reality critical venues for business and the exchange of information. Patrons did not come solely to satisfy hunger or thirst. Many entered the tavern with the intention of conducting transactions, finding work, or securing alliances. From merchants seeking to sell or trade goods, to travelers looking for employment, to knights recruiting soldiers for campaigns, the tavern functioned as an informal marketplace as well as a social arena. The lay out of the tavern itself facilitated this commerce. Long, communal tables encouraged interaction, allowing strangers to converse and negotiate side by side. Benches, often worn smooth from centuries of use, were arranged to accommodate groups of various sizes, from solitary travelers to large delegations. Nooks and corners were often reserved for more private discussions, where sensitive deals could be negotiated away from the ears of the general crowd. The presence of the tavern keeper was crucial. Their oversight ensured that transactions proceeded fairly, disputes were mediated, and the environment remained conducive to commerce. The tavern was, in essence, an ecosystem designed to foster both social cohesion and economic activity. Merchants were frequent patrons, bringing with them goods from near and far. A traveling cloth merchant might display samples of dyed fabric on a bench, allowing potential buyers to examine the quality and texture before agreeing on a price. A spice trader might unpack sacks of cinnamon, cloves, or saffron, filling the air with exotic aromas that intrigued villagers and wealthier patrons alike. These merchants relied on the tavern not only as a venue to sell their wares, but also as a space to gather information, assess the local economy, and establish contacts. The sound of negotiation, voices rising and falling, the occasional exclamation of agreement or dismay, was as integral to the tavern's atmosphere as music or laughter. The tavern also served as a site for recruitment and networking. Knights and soldiers frequently stopped at taverns to hire men for military campaigns, promising wages, food, and the possibility of plunder in exchange for service. Farmers or laborers seeking seasonal work could negotiate arrangements with traveling employers, discussing terms and conditions in the presence of witnesses who could vouch for fairness. Even minor nobles or officials might frequent taverns to identify promising talent, scout local opportunities, or simply gauge the mood and loyalty of the populace. In this sense, the tavern functioned as a bridge between social classes, facilitating interaction that might otherwise have been constrained by formal hierarchies and rigid societal norms. The art of negotiation within the tavern was subtle and highly developed. Patrons quickly learned that success depended not only on knowledge of the goods or services being exchanged, but also on reading human behavior. A merchant might notice how a potential buyer handles a piece of fabric, the speed with which they reach for a tankard, or the tone of their voice. These observations provided clues about wealth, intent, and bargaining style. Conversely, patrons seeking to buy goods or services had to gauge the merchant's reliability, experience, and willingness to compromise. The tavern was a laboratory of human interaction, where commerce and psychology intertwined in complex and often unpredictable ways. Deals were often formalized with symbolic gestures. A handshake over a mug of ale could signify agreement, a nod could confirm understanding, and the exchange of coins or tokens would seal the transaction. In some cases, verbal agreements were sufficient, reinforced by the social expectation that promises made in public would be honored. This reliance on reputation and communal oversight was crucial in a world where formal legal systems were often inaccessible or slow to respond. The tavern provided a stage for these social contracts to be enacted, witnessed, and enforced, blending practical necessity with cultural norms. Tavern commerce was not limited to material goods. Information itself was a form of currency, often as valuable as gold. Travelers brought news of distant towns, impending conflicts, market trends, or unusual events, which could be exchanged for ale, food, or other favors. The careful listening and dissemination of this information allowed patrons to make strategic decisions, whether in trade, employment, or social maneuvering. In a world without newspapers or rapid communication, the tavern was a vital conduit for knowledge, shaping both local economies and the broader social landscape. The negotiation of debts and loans also played a significant role. Patrons might borrow a mug of ale with the promise to repay later, or negotiate credit for goods they could not immediately purchase. These arrangements were often informal but carried weight due to the close-knit nature of tavern society and the potential consequences of default. A broken promise could lead to public embarrassment, damage to reputation, or even physical confrontation, while a fulfilled obligation could enhance standing and strengthen relationships. In this way, the tavern functioned as a site of both risk and opportunity, where social and economic capital were constantly in flux. Business in the tavern extended beyond the walls of the building itself. Deals struck within often had ripple effects throughout the community. A merchant who successfully sold cloth or spices might travel to neighboring villages, spreading news of quality products and gaining new customers. A laborer hired for seasonal work would contribute to agricultural productivity elsewhere, while knights recruiting soldiers could alter the outcome of military campaigns. In this sense, the tavern was a node in a wider network of commerce and influence, connecting individuals and communities across geographic and social boundaries. The physical arrangement of the tavern also influenced economic activity. The central hearth, while primarily providing warmth and light, served as a gathering point for informal discussions and preliminary negotiations. Traders would often position themselves near the fire to attract attention and signal availability. Benches and tables were strategically used to display goods, create barriers for privacy, or encourage dialogue among potential buyers and sellers. The architecture and spatial organization of the tavern were therefore not merely functional, but actively shaped the flow of commerce and interaction. Tavern culture encouraged creative forms of negotiation. Haggling was expected, and patrons developed skill in persuasion, bluffing, and reading social cues. A merchant might feign disinterest in a sale to drive up perceived value, while a buyer might pretend ignorance to lower the price. These interactions were often accompanied by humor, storytelling, or subtle flattery, demonstrating that commerce in the tavern was as much about performance as it was about transaction. The combination of strategy, observation, and improvisation made every deal a small drama, engaging both participants and onlookers. Social dynamics were inseparable from economic activity. Status, reputation, and alliances influenced who could negotiate successfully and who might be ignored or dismissed. A well-known and respected patron could command favorable terms, while a newcomer might need to prove reliability through repeated transactions or public displays of honesty. The tavern, therefore, acted as a leveler and amplifier of social forces, allowing some to rise quickly and others to falter based on skill, charm, and situational awareness. Observing these interactions provides insight into medieval social hierarchies and the interplay between power, opportunity, and human behavior. Patrons also used the tavern to build networks that extended beyond immediate transactions. Regular visitors developed relationships with merchants, travelers, and local laborers, creating a web of contacts that could be leveraged for business, security, or social influence. The repetition of interactions allowed trust to develop gradually, transforming the tavern into a space where economic relationships could mature and evolve. For travelers, the tavern functioned as a gateway to new opportunities, providing introductions, information, and sometimes even letters of recommendation or endorsement. Conflict and negotiation were deeply intertwined. Disputes over prices, debts, or services were common, and the tavern provided mechanisms for resolution. Patrons relied on social norms, reputation, and the authority of the tavern keeper to mediate disagreements. Physical altercations were not unheard of, yet they were often contained by a combination of spatial awareness, social pressure, and intervention by respected figures. These conflicts reinforced the rules and expectations governing commerce and behavior, demonstrating the tavern's role as a site of both opportunity and regulation. Even entertainment was linked to commerce. Musicians, storytellers, and performers relied on the generosity of patrons to earn their living, while patrons judged the quality of performance with both applause and payment. Successful entertainers could gain reputation and future opportunities, while subpar performers were quickly identified. In this way, the tavern created a microeconomy of skill, performance, and reward, illustrating how commerce, culture, and social interaction were deeply intertwined. The negotiation of services extended beyond traditional labor and trade. Patrons might seek guidance from local healers, barbers, or craftsmen who visited the tavern to offer their expertise. Apprentices might find opportunities for learning, while merchants could identify potential apprentices or assistants. Even the provision of lodging, if the tavern offered rooms, involved a complex negotiation of rates, services, and expectations. The tavern was therefore multifunctional, blending commerce, entertainment, socialization, and hospitality into a single, dynamic environment. The informal nature of tavern commerce was both a strength and a vulnerability. Without formal contracts, transactions relied heavily on trust, social pressure, and the presence of witnesses. A merchant or laborer's reputation was constantly on display, and any misstep could have immediate consequences. Yet this informality also allowed flexibility, creativity, and rapid adaptation, enabling patrons to respond quickly to changing circumstances, seize opportunities, or mitigate risks. The tavern thus exemplified the balance between structure and improvisation that characterized much of medieval social and economic life. The language of negotiation was also important. Patrons used a mix of formal and colloquial speech, humor, and gestures to convey intent, assert authority, or signal acquiescence. A wink, a nod, or a subtle smile could carry as much meaning as a verbal promise, and skilled negotiators were attuned to these nuances. Observing or participating in these interactions required careful attention, social intelligence, and experience. making the tavern a training ground for interpersonal skill as much as a venue for economic exchange. Over time, the tavern functioned as a center of reputation, building and social proof, success in negotiation, reliability in transactions, and generosity in shared consumption contributed to a patron's standing. These reputations were remembered and discussed, influencing future opportunities and interactions. The tavern was therefore both a marketplace and a stage where individuals performed, demonstrated competence, and cultivated social capital, all while pursuing tangible economic gain. By the late evening, the cumulative effect of these interactions created a dense, layered social and economic ecosystem. Deals were struck, alliances formed, debts acknowledged, and opportunities discovered. Patrons left the tavern with more than ale in their bellies. They carried new contacts, valuable information, and a sense of where they stood within the social and economic hierarchy of their community. The tavern's role as a hub of commerce and negotiation was thus inseparable from its role as a center of social life, entertainment, and cultural exchange. In essence, the medieval tavern was an engine of opportunity. Its walls enclosed a dynamic interplay of trade, negotiation, information exchange, and social maneuvering. Every conversation, every transaction, and every performance contributed to a complex system in which reputation, skill, and timing mattered as much as wealth or brute strength. The tavern was simultaneously a marketplace, a court, a theater, and a community center, a place where human ingenuity, ambition, and interaction converged in ways that shaped the economic and social landscape of the Middle Ages. The tavern's enduring significance lies in its ability to blend these functions seamlessly. Patrons could drink, eat, entertain, trade, learn, and socialize all within a single space, experiencing the rhythms and dynamics of medieval life in concentrated form. The lessons learned, the deals struck, and the networks built here had consequences far beyond the walls of the tavern, influencing local economies, social structures, and the opportunities available to individuals and families. Understanding commerce in the medieval tavern is therefore essential to understanding the broader social and economic systems of the time. Here, business was not merely transactional, it was relational, performative, and deeply human. The success of a merchant, laborer, or noble depended on skill, observation, and the ability to navigate a web of social cues, reputation, and opportunity. The tavern was the stage upon which these dramas unfolded, a living testament to the complexity, creativity, and resilience of medieval society. While the medieval tavern was a place of community, commerce, and celebration, it was equally a site of danger, unpredictability, and raw human emotion. Unlike modern establishments with strict regulations, security personnel, and social norms reinforced by law, the tavern existed in a world governed by reputation, social hierarchy, and physical presence. The walls that contained laughter and music also contained tension, rivalry, and the ever-present risk of conflict. Patrons entering a medieval tavern quickly learned that along with the warmth of the hearth and the comfort of a meal came exposure to the chaotic realities of human behavior, a world in which tempers could flare, fists could fly, and even the most mundane disagreements could escalate into violence. The lay out of the tavern contributed to both the conviviality and the danger. Long, communal tables encouraged interaction, but they also created opportunities for disputes. Benches squeezed close together left little room for personal space, increasing the likelihood of accidental bumps, spilled drinks, or misunderstandings that could ignite tempers. The hearth, while central and comforting, drew attention to the occupants near it, creating competition for proximity and status. Every gesture, every glance, and every word carried weight, signaling intent and testing boundaries. Patrons were constantly assessing the room, gauging who posed a threat, who could be trusted, and who might exploit a moment of distraction. Alcohol, a central feature of tavern life, heightened both camaraderie and risk. While a tankard of ale could lubricate conversation, encourage laughter, and ease social interactions, it could also inflame tempers and impair judgment. Patrons under the influence often misinterpreted gestures, words, or intentions, leading to disputes that might have been avoided in a sober context. The stronger the drink, the greater the potential for conflict. Tavern keepers understood this delicate balance and often monitored consumption carefully, sometimes refusing service to those who appeared too intoxicated or too aggressive. Even so, the unpredictable nature of human behavior ensured that disputes were an inherent part of the tavern's environment. Arguments were frequent and could arise from a wide range of causes. A disagreement over a spilled drink, an insult, a cheating accusation during a game of dice, or a dispute over seating could escalate rapidly. The tavern's crowded, noisy environment made misunderstandings almost inevitable. Patrons interpreted tone, gesture, and expression in real time, often with limited information, and the stakes were high. Reputation, pride, and even physical safety could be at risk. Observers learned to read subtle cues, tension in posture, a clenched fist, a quickened step, as early warning signs of trouble, allowing them to choose whether to intervene, flee, or watch the drama unfold. Physical confrontations, though often brief, were an accepted risk of tavern life. Fistfights were common, occasionally escalating to the use of sticks, mugs, or improvised weapons. The noise of a scuffle, shouting, the scraping of chairs, the crash of mugs would draw attention, and other patrons often played a role in either escalating or containing the conflict. Brawls were as much about social negotiation as physical aggression. A successful fighter could enhance their reputation, assert dominance, or defend their honor, while a poorly timed or clumsy engagement could result in injury, humiliation, or even expulsion. Tavern keepers frequently acted as referees, using physical presence, authority, and persuasion to restore order while minimizing damage. The threat of theft or deception added another layer of danger. In a crowded, noisy environment, pickpockets and opportunists could strike with relative impunity. Patrons carried coins, jewelry, or valuable information, and a moment of distraction could result in loss. Travelers, in particular, were vulnerable, often unfamiliar with local social codes or the reputations of those around them. Observant patrons and tavern keepers mitigated these risks by maintaining awareness, developing networks of trusted individuals, and relying on communal enforcement of social norms. Still, the risk of betrayal or theft was ever present, reminding everyone that vigilance was a necessary survival skill. The tavern was also a venue for gambling, which introduced both excitement and peril. Dice games, card-like games, and other contests of chance drew crowds eager for entertainment or profit. Yet gambling carried significant risks, as disputes over outcomes, cheating accusations, and attempts to manipulate results could easily escalate into violence. Patrons learned quickly that success required skill not only in the game itself, but in managing social interactions, reading opponents, and maintaining composure under pressure. A single mistake, misstep, or poorly chosen word could result in injury or loss, highlighting the precarious balance between opportunity and danger in the tavern environment. Disease and hygiene posed additional hazards. Taverns were crowded, poorly ventilated, and often unsanitary. Floors, benches, and tables were rarely cleaned with modern standards in mind, and the mix of spilled food, drink, mud, and animal presence created an environment ripe for illness. Patrons were exposed to infections, lice, and other ailments that could spread rapidly in close quarters. The communal nature of food, drink, and utensils further increased the risk of contagion. While people developed some immunity and practical strategies to mitigate illness, the tavern remained a space in which the pleasures of communal life were inseparable from potential health hazards. Fire was another ever-present danger. The hearth provided warmth and the means to cook, but open flames, soot, and combustible materials created a significant risk. Sparks could ignite straw, wooden beams, or cloth, and accidents involving cooking implements or candles were common. Patrons and tavern keepers were acutely aware of this risk, developing informal strategies for containment, but the potential for a catastrophic fire remained a real and terrifying possibility. The juxtaposition of comfort and hazard, the warmth of the hearth against the threat of flames, was emblematic of the tavern's broader balance of pleasure and peril. Social hierarchies also influenced the dangers within a tavern. Class, reputation, and local standing could determine how conflicts were resolved, who was tolerated, and who faced expulsion or aggression. A well-known merchant or respected local figure might have the leeway to act provocatively without immediate consequences, while a newcomer, traveler, or lower-status individual had to navigate the space with caution. Misreading social cues or violating local norms could provoke hostility, demonstrating that knowledge, observation, and adaptability were as critical to survival as physical strength. Certain patrons brought their own forms of danger. Soldiers, mercenaries, or adventurers passing through often carried weapons and were accustomed to resolving disputes with force. Outlaws or criminals sometimes used taverns as meeting points, creating tension and risk for those nearby. Even those with no intent to harm could inadvertently trigger conflict by appearing disrespectful, challenging authority, or failing to follow unspoken rules. The tavern's environment demanded constant attention, with patrons learning to read context, gauge intentions, and act decisively to protect themselves and their interests. Conflict often had consequences beyond the immediate altercation. Injuries could impair a patron's ability to work or travel, financial losses could impact livelihood, and public humiliation could affect reputation for years. The stakes were real and tangible, making every interaction a potential test of skill, patience, and social intelligence. Tavern patrons became adept at calculating risk, managing disputes, and leveraging alliances, recognizing that survival and success depended as much on interpersonal acuity as on physical capability. Yet the dangers of the tavern also fostered resilience and adaptability. Patrons learned to anticipate conflict, navigate complex social dynamics, and respond quickly to unpredictable situations. Skills in negotiation, observation, and self-defense were honed in this environment, preparing individuals for the wider challenges of medieval life. The tavern was both a crucible and a classroom, teaching lessons about human behavior, community norms, and the delicate balance between opportunity and risk. Tavern conflicts were not always physical. Verbal sparring, intimidation, and strategic maneuvering could be equally effective in asserting dominance or defending interests. Patrons who mastered rhetoric, timing, and social perception could influence outcomes without resorting to violence. Reputation was a powerful tool, and those known for fairness, cunning, or intimidation could navigate the tavern environment with relative security. Conversely, those lacking skill or awareness faced heightened risk, emphasizing that intellectual and social acuity were critical survival tools. Even seemingly mundane activities carried potential danger. Sitting too close to a rival, joining a contentious discussion, or handling another patron's goods could spark disagreements. Patrons learned to anticipate reactions, position themselves strategically, and intervene when necessary to maintain balance. Observing patterns of behavior, alliances, and rivalries became an essential part of tavern life, with attention to detail often distinguishing those who thrived from those who suffered setbacks. Noise and chaos, while part of the tavern's vibrancy, could amplify danger. In a crowded, dimly lit room, misunderstandings were frequent, and rapid movement, clatter of mugs, and overlapping voices made it difficult to track intentions. Accidental contact, a bumped shoulder, spilled drink, or unintended insult could escalate quickly. Patrons who mastered spatial awareness, timing, and reading auditory and visual cues gained advantage, while those inattentive or inexperienced were vulnerable. The chaotic environment demanded constant vigilance and adaptation. Despite these risks, taverns remained central to social and economic life. The dangers were balanced by the opportunities they offered: access to information, commerce, entertainment, and community. Patrons accepted risk as part of the experience, navigating it with skill, observation, and social intelligence. The tavern was a microcosm of medieval society, reflecting both its vitality and its perils. The tavern was also a place of moral and ethical complexity. Theft, deception, and opportunism coexisted with generosity, hospitality, and solidarity. Patrons learned that survival required discernment, choosing when to act, when to observe, and when to intervene. Ethical decisions were often pragmatic rather than abstract, guided by immediate consequences, social norms, and personal reputation. This moral negotiation was inseparable from the tavern's dangers, shaping behavior and defining the boundaries of acceptable conduct. Even minor children present in many taverns were exposed to these realities. They observed arguments, fights, and negotiations, learning lessons about risk, strategy, and social dynamics. These early experiences shaped their understanding of community, hierarchy, and the balance between opportunity and danger. The tavern functioned as a formative environment, teaching both survival skills and cultural norms. Firearms were rare, but knives and other small weapons were often present. Patrons accustomed to violence carried them openly or discreetly, creating the potential for lethal outcomes. Tavern keepers and regular patrons learned to recognize signs of imminent danger, stepping in to diffuse situations or calling on allies to restore order. These interventions required judgment, timing, and authority, illustrating the complex social management inherent in tavern life. Disease, violence, and theft were inseparable from the pleasures of the tavern. Patrons understood that enjoyment and risk coexisted, and they navigated the environment accordingly. Observation, adaptation, and social intelligence were essential. The tavern was a crucible of human behavior, a space where resilience, cunning, and courage were constantly tested. Those who mastered these skills could thrive, forming alliances, gaining reputation, and enjoying the communal and economic benefits the tavern offered. Ultimately, the medieval tavern was a paradoxical space, simultaneously warm and dangerous, inviting and chaotic, communal and competitive. Its risks were real, yet they contributed to the vibrancy, authenticity, and intensity of the experience. Patrons accepted these dangers as part of the larger tapestry of medieval life, learning, adapting, and participating in a dynamic environment that reflected both the beauty and brutality of their world. The medieval tavern, in all its chaotic vibrancy, its warmth, its smells, its music, and its dangers, was far more than a simple drinking hall or a place to rest between travels. It was a cornerstone of community, a stage upon which the dramas of daily life unfolded, and a repository of culture, memory, and tradition. Its influence extended beyond the walls of wood, stone, and straw that housed it, reaching into the social, economic, and even moral fabric of medieval society. To understand the tavern is to understand the rhythms, priorities, and values of the communities that sustained it. The legacy of these spaces is found not only in historical records, but in the echoes of their influence that persisted long after their physical structures crumbled. Taverns were centers of community life, acting as focal points where individuals from diverse walks of life intersected. Farmers returning from the fields, merchants from neighboring towns, travelers from distant regions, and artisans all crossed paths in these spaces,